Everyone, for the benefit of anyone watching on YouTube here, this is going to be a tutorial looking at source questions in A-level politics. I'm going to be going through an answer. I'm here with my lovely A-level Year 12 class from 2021, if you're watching this in the future. And we're going to be going through a practice source question and explaining how I go from the question to planning, to looking at the source, to actually starting to write it. And I'm going to use this question here, which I believe we looked at briefly last week, but I want to show it from start to finish. So the first thing I would do when I get to a source question is I would look at the question. I would ignore the source to begin with, and I would go straight to the question. And like Titalea was saying earlier, she's saying, what is the difference between this and a normal question? I think the best thing to do is actually just treat it initially as a normal question, and look at the question and think about what it is that you think. So let's have a look. It says here, could you just tell me, can you guys see my screen okay? Can you just give me a thumbs up or say yes out loud if you can see the screen?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So using the source, evaluate the use of referendums to determine important political and constitutional issues. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to treat this just like a normal question. So we can almost ignore this bit just for a minute and say, well, the question is, evaluate the use of referendums to determine important political and constitutional issues. So we need to do the usual thing we do in a question and just work out what the question's saying. So let's just look at it. Okay, so this question is about the use of referendums. So I'm going to put that in bold. So this essay is basically about whether referendums are good or bad, but it's giving me a condition to determine important political and constitutional issues. Okay, so in my head now, I might start to think, well, what are important constitutional, political and constitutional issues? So we're going to be talking about things here such as Brexit. We're going to be talking about things like Scottish independence. I'm just trying to get into my head that I understand the question. So note, I'm not looking at the source yet. I'm just trying to understand the question. And what else might be an important political issue? I mean, I guess even things like Corona could be an important political issue. But notice it says Corona, I can't spell it. It says constitutional issues here as well. So what other constitutional issues might we have? We might have things like the House of Lords. We might have things like a codified constitution. So note here, I've got some which have actually happened as referendums, and then I've got some which haven't happened as referendums, but maybe I could talk about whether they could. I'm just kind of starting to think about where you might use referendums and where you might not. The second thing I'm going to do, and I think this is good for any essay, is to think about what are the two sides of the argument. And it's normally going to be a yes, and it's normally going to be a no, but what is the yes and the no? So using the source, evaluate the use of referendums to determine political and constitutional issues. So my yes is going to be, yes, referendums are good, useful to make these decisions. And my no is going to be, no, these aren't really good ways of making important political and constitutional issues. Sometimes I think this question is quite straightforward to find out what the yes and the no is, but sometimes it is a bit tricky to go, well, what exactly is yes and what exactly is no? And I'm going to put these just on the screen so as a kind of a reminder to myself. If I was doing this in an exam, I would probably make a little table on a scrap bit of paper. Yes are good. So I'm just going to put here, yes, referendums are good for deciding issues. And I'm going to make that box green. And then I've worked out that the other side of the argument is evaluate the use of referendums to determine important issues. So it's going to be no. Referendums are bad, and good and bad can mean different things here. It can mean useful, not useful, effective, helpful, divisive, not all that kind of stuff. But as the question doesn't really give us any more guidance on that, I'm just going to go in as a general: referendums are good for deciding these issues, and no, referendums are bad for deciding these issues. I'm also just going to put another color here, just on the side in another box, which is because I'm going to be going through the sources in a minute. And I'm just going to have another color for any useful example that I think I might want to use in the essay that the source gives me. And I'm going to do, I'll use blue for that. So am I ready to start looking at the source yet? Well, the only other thing I think I would do before I read the source is I would just spend a moment to think about, well, what do I think? What's my gut instinct on this question? Because you are going to be writing an essay, a normal essay, where you will take one side or the other. It is not just, you're not just going to be explaining the source. That would get you a bad mark. You are going to be answering this question. So I'm just going to take a minute and just think, well, what do I think about referendums for determining important political and constitutional issues? You know, which box basically do I think I'm going to be going in? Just so I start to process it. And personally, I'm not really a fan of referendums. I think they're quite exciting and I think they're kind of fun, but I don't think they really kind of solve the problems. So I think I'm going to be going on this side. I might change my mind after I read the source, but I've already kind of thought about how I think I might argue. And in my head, I'm kind of thinking, well, I think it tends to divide the country rather than solve issues. And I hopefully I'll get to kind of use that. Now, now I'm ready to read the source. And obviously, if I was doing this in a real exam, I'd have gone faster and I would have just read the question, underlined a few words, worked out the yes, worked out the no, and then gone straight into and thought about it for a second and gone straight in. It probably I would have taken 60 seconds to get to the point where I am already, but obviously I'm slowing it down to show you guys how to do it. Now, and let me just grab a. Just going to Google argument in a pub. Let's see if I can get a nice image here. Now, the way I like to think about source questions, and the reason why I think that source questions are nice questions to answer is because I like to think of them like this. I like to think of them about I want you to imagine that the source is one of these guys in the middle, or girls in the middle, and that they are kind of presenting you with this argument. And you have the choice about whether you want to be on this guy's side or whether you want to be on the other side. So basically, let's say the source is this bloke here. The source is going to be here going, well, blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, 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 blah. And then either you can come along on this side and say, yeah, these are great points. I agree with this. I'm totally with this dude. Or you can be this guy here and you can be kind of like, no, I think this is complete rubbish. This is what this guy is saying. And it's useless. It's terrible. And so a source essay in essence is you're either going to be taking this guy down or you're going to be building this side up. Does that make sense? So you're kind of arguing with or arguing against the source. Now there's sometimes, and I've seen both of these exist. Sometimes you get a question, a source question, where they present to you one argument. So in essence, let me hang on. How do I change my thing? Let's go something like that. Go for something like that. Quick styles, make it thicker, make it thicker. Weight, like that. Make it nice and yellow. There you go. Sometimes the source will be just one side of the argument, and they did a question like this in 2020. So sometimes the source will present to you just one side, in which case you either agree with that. Let's pretend like the let's make you nice and green for argument's sake. So either if it's just one side in the source, then you either agree with the source or you disagree with the source, and you kind of either go with or you go outside. But sometimes, and like the source we're going to look at today, sometimes the source will actually present you with two arguments, in which case you kind of then need to decide which side of the source you want to agree with. So sometimes the source will almost feel like there's an argument already taking place. Have you ever been there when some of your friends are having a fight? You kind of have a choice. You kind of, do I support this person? Do I support that person? Or do I sit there hoping the whole thing will be over soon? Now, most of the time we try and stay out of it. But in this case, you've got to pick a side. If you come across a source that has two sides, like the one we're looking at today, you either need to be this bloke here supporting this guy, or you need to be this bloke here supporting this guy, or girl, or gender neutral, transsexual, whichever gender pronoun you wish to use today, whatever it is, you need to kind of pick a side. So that's why I like source questions, because you're basically joining in an argument that's already happening and you're taking one side or the other. So let's go back to our source. And now let's have a look and see what's there. And I hope we've got an understanding. Does anyone have any questions so far? You can unmute or you can type into the chat. I'll keep talking, but if anyone wants to ask anything, just go ahead. And so the reason why you are perfectly entitled not to like them, and I can see some people in the class don't like them, and that's fine. But the reason why I like them is because I love debating, and I love the idea of kind of joining in a debate that's already kind of taking place. And so if you think of it like that, you know, like, okay, someone's presenting me an argument, right, I'm going to get involved in this fight and kind of tell them what I think. So here we go. So I'm going to read through the source, and I'm going to color in the text as I go. Anything that I think is arguing yes, they're good, I'm going to put in green. Anything that I think no, they're bad, I'm going to put in a kind of an orangey red. And anything that I think is just a useful example that I can talk about in my essay, I'm going to put in blue. And if I was doing this in the actual thing, either I'd make a little table and I'd write it out, or I'd actually highlight it by using a highlighter. The 2016 referendum on the UK's membership of the EU. Okay, well, so far that's not giving me an argument, it's just giving me an example. So I'll colour that in blue because I probably will talk about it. The 2016 referendum on the UK's membership of the European Union was perhaps the most important democratic exercise in the history of the country. Now, one of the things that you'll find in sources is that sometimes an argument will be really, really obvious. Let me find an obvious one for you. The question, of course, was important, of course, but the fact that millions of voters took part in making such a momentous decision was most impressive. It certainly settled the issue after many years of political conflict, and people who felt they did not have a voice were now listened to. Okay, so this bit here feels to me like a very obvious good thing. People who felt that they did not have a voice were now listened to. Yes, referendums are good for deciding issues because people who felt they didn't have a voice were now listened to. So I'm going to put that one in green, because it's quite an obvious argument for them being good. But sometimes the arguments are more subtle and they are inferred. So the text might not say referendums are good because, but actually if you look at what's been written, you can kind of say, no, there is an argument being presented here. So if we look here, the 2016 referendum on the UK's membership of the European Union was perhaps the most important democratic exercise in the history of the country. Now, it doesn't say they are good because it's a democratic exercise, but I think I could probably highlight that in green. An important democratic exercise. I could turn that into an argument, couldn't I? I could be like, well, it's good for democracy. It gets people involved. Referendums are good because they allow for democracy and people to kind of make their decisions, thinking about direct democracy and things like that. So sometimes when you're looking at a source, you have to think, well, is an argument being made here? Is it like explicit or is it subtle? But if it's there, let's highlight it in green or highlight it in red. You know, if you think you can use it and not use it, you know, think of it in this way. Like if you were arguing with this person or against this person, could you use what they've just said? And if someone came up to me and said, well, I think it's an important democratic exercise, I could be like, no, it's a terrible democratic exercise. So if you can use it as an argument, it is an argument. Let's carry on. The question was important, of course, but the fact that many millions of voters took part. Okay, again, I think we could turn that. So many millions of people took part. So if we've been talking about political participation this week, you know now that party participation is down. You know now that party membership is down. You know that voting turnout is down. So this is a good argument. And also, you should already be thinking, can I build that up? Can I knock that down? You know some examples already, don't you? You know what the turnout was for the Brexit referendum. Remember? You know what the turnout was for the AV referendum. Remember? So you can fight for that, or you can fight against that. So again, I'm going to put it in green. Are you starting to see now already how this essay is going to pan out? You know, you see how I'm already kind of thinking, am I going to agree with this or disagree with this? You know, am I going to build up that argument or knock it down? Many millions of voters took part in making such a momentous decision was most impressive. You could colour that in green, but impressive isn't really an argument. So I'm going to leave that one because it's not really an argument in itself. It's not really something I can debate. Like if someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, that's impressive," you'd be like, "Well, why?" You know, it's not. It doesn't actually include the reason. It certainly settled the issue after many years of political conflict. Okay, I think that's one. It certainly settled the issue. So I'm going to highlight that in green already. The vote created both legitimacy and public consent for the decision. And I think there's another one. You guys should be aware what legitimacy means and public consent. It means that it has permission from the people, the citizens, to do whatever the decision is. If you're not sure about legitimacy and public consent, look it up in the keywords glossary of your textbooks. And then the text goes on, but behind the euphoria, there are also serious concerns. So I can feel now that the text is about to change and give me the other side. So let's imagine that what we've just read is this bloke here making his case to say that referendums are great. So to make it very clear, let's say this is green. Let's change our color here to something a bit more neutral. So we'll go purple. So now we're about to hear from the other side. We're about to hear from the other side here that's going to present it in. Now remember, not all sources will present both sides of the argument. Technically they're supposed to, but they don't always. So now let's have a look. But behind the euphoria, there were also serious concerns. Now, serious concerns by itself is not an argument. You know, if someone said to you, "I've got concerns," you can't say, "Ha, no, you don't." You have to say, "Well, what are the concerns?" So that's not an argument yet. The referendum campaign was dogged with controversy about misinformation and lack of clarity. Now, if I highlight that, I could maybe discuss the word controversy. But again, controversy by itself doesn't really give me the evidence. I think the most useful bit to highlight here is actually this. The controversy is about misinformation and lack of clarity. So, for example, misinformation might be the £350 million on the side of a bus. Lack of clarity might be, well, how exactly are we going to leave? Soft Brexit, hard Brexit? Are we going to still be under the European Court of Justice? What's going to happen with Northern Ireland? And so there's my argument. The press were also accused of bias, with popular tabloids campaigning relentlessly for a leave vote. Okay, so the press were accused of bias. Tabloids campaigning relentlessly for a leave vote. So that's an example which I can discuss. So I'm going to put that into blue. Perhaps more importantly, some sections of the community felt they had been steamrolled into a decision against their will. So the referendum result was what, 52-48? So this bit is arguing about this idea that 48% of people felt they were forced into something against their will. Similar with the Scottish referendum. I think the final result there was 60 something, but you've still got at least 30% of people, a third of people, that would actually rather have an independent Scotland right now. Younger voters, the Scots and the Londoners were all groups who voted strongly to remain within the EU. Oh, I'm so sorry. That should be red, not blue, because that's a new argument. Sorry if that was confusing. Oh, and I failed somehow. There you go. Younger voters, the Scots and Londoners, were all groups who had voted strongly to remain in the EU, but they were overwhelmed by the national majority. So that, you've got to use your brain here, is an example of that. So I'm going to put that into blue, because you've got to be careful that you work out what are the separate arguments that you have. And I'm going to be putting some arrows on here in a minute. And when you've got something that's all part of the same argument, we need to put it together and not put it in two separate ones. The result was also very close, hardly a decisive outcome. But however much we may analyse the result, in the end, the people had spoken and democracy had been served. Okay, so the result was very close, hardly a decisive outcome. I think that is a new argument. If I want to be very picky, I could argue that a not decisive outcome is the argument, and the result being very close is probably evidence for that, if I want to really kind of sort it out in my head how I'm doing it. But however much we may analyse the result, in the end, the people had spoken and democracy had been served. Okay, so right at the end here, the source has just swung back to giving me another argument on this side. Okay, so now we have understood the question, worked out the two sides, gone through the source and worked out all of the arguments that we've got on both sides. And so now it is time for us to decide once and for all where we are going to sit. You must not sit in the middle in a politics essay. You must not kind of sit there going, well, there's good arguments on both sides. Part of what you may genuinely be in the middle, but the examiner is looking for you in terms of your skill, your ability to make a case on one side. So you have to either be this bloke or this bloke. You must not be the bloke in the middle. So it's time for us to make this choice now. Now, I've already thought that I'd quite like to go on the no side. The question is now is whether I think that the arguments here are strong enough for me to make that kind of no case. Because as you correctly were talking earlier, I think it was Ella that said it, we do have to use the arguments that are presented to us. This is the catch in a source question, is that we can't now bring in completely new arguments to debate. We can bring in our own examples, we can bring in counter arguments, but we've got to start with what the source is actually saying. So let's have a look. So on the yes side, it's important democratic exercise, millions of voters took part, it settled the issue, people who felt they had a voice were now listened to, it gave legitimacy and public consent. How strong do I think that is? Or there was misinformation and a lack of clarity, the press were biased, large sections felt they were steamrolled into a decision against their will, and it was hardly a decisive outcome. There is no correct side to go. Both of those sides contain good arguments. You could easily write this essay, sorry, easily is the wrong phrase. It is entirely possible to write this essay on both sides and get a brilliant grade. I think this is actually a really nice source. But I'm going to go with my instinct. I don't really like referendums, so I'm going to go and be this guy here. So I'm going to team up with Team Red to take down Team Green, which means that I am going to be arguing these, and I need to criticize these. Is everyone with me so far? And in essence, now it kind of becomes a normal essay. Now, this is the bit that is tricky. This is the bit that I personally struggle with source exercises, is because what I need to do now is work out an essay plan. I'm personally quite comfortable with finding the arguments in the source. I'm quite comfortable with kind of going, right, yep, I think I know which side I want to argue. I'm quite good at finding the examples, but this is the bit I struggle with. You might struggle with one of the bits I've just shown you, and that's fine. We'll work together on that. We'll be practicing that. But the bit I struggle with is how do I now turn this into an essay structure? And you guys are probably aware that what I like to do is the build up a wall and knock it down structure. So I like to find an argument that I don't like, say, for example, this one, and then counter it with an argument that I do like, for example, this one, and then make that my structure. Now, that structure won't always work, sadly, but let's hope it does, because that's a good, solid structure. But so for that structure to work, I need to create pairs. I need to find an argument on one side that I can build up and then knock down, and an argument on the other side that I can then use to be my criticism. Now, I've deliberately picked a source today where we can do this relatively simply. So I'm looking for pairs of counter arguments where I can put my structure together. So I'm just going to now start to kind of do my structure down the side here. This might end up looking a little bit scrappy because I haven't got much room, but hopefully you'll see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to start off with my intro, and as you know, we should have our thesis statement in our introduction. So I'm going to be saying referendums are bad. So there's my intro. Section 1. Or maybe we'll do the structure later. Let's see if we can find these pairs, and then we'll work on the structure. So how can I pair up these arguments? Let's have a look. Well, this one here says it settled the issue, and this one here says it was hardly a decisive outcome. Do you see how those two arguments are two sides of the same coin? Do you get that? You know, to do referendums settle issues, or actually are they indecisive? I think that is a really nice pair that I can put together. I can pick a side and off I go. So I'm going to grab myself a little arrow here, and I'm going to put a line between settled the issue and hardly a decisive outcome, and I'm going to make this nice and thick. So that's going to be one of my sections. Building up this side and then knocking it down with that. I'm going to look for another pair. Democratic exercise, steamroll, trickier. Millions of voters took part. Okay, misinformation, lack of clarity. I could possibly make that work. I could say on one side, well, loads of people took part, which gives it legitimacy, but at the same time, it's misinformation clarity. That could probably work. But actually, if I think here, more importantly, some sections of the community felt they had been steamrolled. Well, if loads of people take part, but actually then loads of people then feel that they're actually forced into a decision they don't like, that feels to me like quite a good fit. Now, note what I'm saying here. I probably could make many millions of people took part fit with misinformation and lack of clarity. I could probably say, well, loads of people took part, but actually, if they're taking part on the basis of facts that are wrong, then that doesn't work. I could probably make that fit. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer here, but in my view, my personal view, it fits even better to say, well, many millions of people took part, but actually many of them end up with a decision that's against their will. To me, that feels like an even better fit, because I'm talking about here the numbers of people. There's a kind of a common thread there of how that works. So I'm going to put a line here between many millions of voters took part to community felt they're steamrolled against their will. So let's put that in a nice thick line so I can see my pair there. Now, often what happens here is that the last section doesn't really fit together. Let's see if it does in this particular case. So I've got one here about people who felt they did not have a voice were now listened to. I've got democratic exercise. I've got legitimacy and public consent. And I've got misinformation of lack of clarity and the bias of the press left. Can I make a pair here? I think I probably can, because I think I could probably go with legitimacy and public consent, and then misinformation. Because if this whole thing is supposed to be about this decision is legitimate and there's public consent for it, but then say, well, actually, it's all based on it's not clear what people are saying, and there's lots of bad information around there anyway. I think that fits together actually quite nicely as a pair. So let's do that in a nice thick black line again. I think I can make that fit. You do not have to include everything from the source. So I think now at this point, I'm going to go, you know what, I'm actually just going to, that one's not going to go into my essay. How do I cross things out? There you go. So that one's not going to go in. People who felt they did not have a voice were now listened to. I think I could probably just connect that into the many millions of voters took part. So that one I'm going to link into something else. So I am going to include that, but I could use it as a quote maybe. But I'm just going to leave out this important democratic exercise. I think this bit here about democracy being served, I might use that quote somewhere, but I'm not going to bring it in as a separate argument. This bit about press accused of bias, I might bring it in here about misinformation. So I might then turn that into an example, or I might miss it out. I'll kind of decide as I'm kind of going through as I'm writing it, but I'm certainly not going to use it as a separate example. So I'm just going to kind of cross it out for now. So I realize I've kind of drawn lots of lines across the thing, but did you see how I built it up? That I've kind of paired up my arguments to be my essay plan. So now I just need to decide, well, what order am I going to write in? And I tend to like to go in with my favorite arguments, with the one that I want to talk about. If you have something here that you think, yep, I definitely want to talk about that, let's get it in first. The one that you think is the weakest, let's put it, or you have the least to say about, put it last, because you might run out of time. And if you do miss things out, it's best to miss out the things that you're not so keen on. So I really like this idea. This is my personal thing. You might put it in a different order. I really like this idea about millions of voters taking part. I think that's quite an interesting one. So I'm going to say, let's use a bullet point. Millions took part. However, what did I counter that with? Millions took part, but I said, oh yeah, lots of people said had a decision against their will. However, people felt decision against their will. So there's my kind of first big section. Let's go. I'm a bit. I'm not sure about this public consent one. I think that's my least favorite one. So I think I'm going to go for this settled the issue one. Because the lovely thing about this settled issue one, we can kind of say, well, did you see Theresa May? Did you see what happened with Boris? Blah, blah, blah. I can make that one up. So referendums, settled issue. However, building up a wall, knocking it down. Not decisive outcome. And for my last section, I'll say referendums give legitimacy. However, what's on the other side of my line here? Misinformation, lack of clarity. Let's make this box a bit bigger. And then my conclusion will then summarize what I've put together. If I can get rid of the, and then my conclusion will kind of summarize what I've done so far. So I realize I've been talking for quite a while here. I realize I've done this kind of very, very slowly, but this is how I would do a source question. I've gone all the way from looking at the question to finding out the arguments that are there to putting together a structure. And now when I write this essay, I'm going to follow this structure. And this is a key point here. Now I know that my arguments are coming from the source. I can bring in any examples and other ideas that I want, because everything here, all of these ideas are taken from the source. So I can bring in all of those examples like Brexit and Scotland and constitutional ideas and the Theresa May government that I mentioned and what Boris did in various elections and the £350 billion on the bus, all those ideas that occurred to me, I can bring them all in because they're going to fit in with these arguments. That's absolutely fine. And I know that because I'm writing in this structure that everything here is coming from the source. So when I write this, I will probably use a few quotes from the source, as in I may well actually kind of go, well, the source says people who felt they did not have a voice were now listened to. We can see this because the turnout went up from here and there. I will use some quotes. I'm going to refer to the source explicitly. So I will say things like the source says, as the source argues, or I disagree with the source when it says. So we're going to be referring to the source as like another actor in this conversation. So if we imagine that this is if this is Bill and Ben, we're going to be arguing with Bill and arguing against Ben, and kind of talk all the other way around and kind of say, well, the source says this, I disagree with the source has argued this, and this backs up the source, but on the other hand, this is a weak argument because. And it should be explicit, and so those phrases should be there when you write. So let's do one together. Let's just do one kind of paragraph together to show you how that's going to work. I tell you what, you guys vote for which ones you want. If you'd like me to write this one here, could you please just say 1 into the chat? If you'd like me to write this one here, put 2 into the chat. And if you'd like me to write this one here, then please put 3 into the chat. So I will write one section in front of you so you can see how I do it, and you can get the idea. And then maybe I'll get you guys to write another one. So 1, 2, or 3. Apparently there are only 3 people awake. Brilliant. Now we've got a draw. Fantastic. Theoretically, there's 11 of you awake here. Come on now, get involved, get involved. Democracy in action. See the problem with direct democracy right here? What if people don't turn out? Okay, it looks like number 1 is our favorite. Okay, so this is the point. This is what I want to argue. Millions of people took part. However, lots of people felt the decision went against their will. So let's just remind myself what I'm writing. So millions of voters took part, making such a momentous decision most impressive. We've got membership of the EU, but then I'm going to be arguing that the decision went against their will, and I've got these bit here about the younger voters, the Scots and Londoners. Okay. So let's be clear what I'm about to do here. I'm going to build up a wall and knock it down. So I'm going to start off by making this case here, but I'm going to do it in such a way that it's clear that I think this argument is weak. And then I'm going to justify why I think that this argument is stronger. So this is the essence of build up a wall and knock it down. I am going to present this argument, but I'm going to make it look bad. And then by the end of this paragraph, I need to show why this is the stronger argument to show, because that's my direction. Okay. So first of all, I need to build up this wall and knock it down. I need to build up this side. So the source, let's turn off the bold. And the bold was not on. The source argues that, now remember, what is this essay about? This essay is about referendums. The essay is not about the source. It's about the use of referendums. So I need to make sure that my point addresses that. The source argues that referendums are good for making constitutional decisions as millions take part. So we can see here the topic that I'm addressing. It's about the numbers of people. And now I'm going to back it up with evidence. And remember, that evidence can come from the source, or it can come from my own knowledge, and maybe ideally a combination of the two. The turnout for the Brexit referendum was high. What was it? It was like 72% or something like that, wasn't it? So let's just say it's over 70%. And the Scottish referendum, so this is my own examples here. The Scottish referendum turnout was even higher. Over 80%. And Mrs. McNally, who's another teacher at St Mary's School, as you guys know, is very fond of saying, so what? Has she ever done that to you in an essay? You know, you write something and then she goes, so what? Now, so far I've given a fact, but I haven't yet explained why that fact is a good thing. So supposing you came up to me and you said, well, the referendum is 80%, the turnout is 80%. Imagine you've got that Mrs. McNally voice in your head going, so what? Let's explain the so what. This means that referendums can be seen to increase political participation and get and involve more citizens than usual. And then I've actually got some more knowledge here that I know that actually a lot of people from the north and from working class areas voted in Brexit than voted in previous ones. So I'm going to use that knowledge that I've got. Again, this is why wider reading is so important, and because it increases the breadth of your knowledge. Dominic Cummings particularly targeted working class voters in the north who don't usually vote in elections, and persuaded them to engage in this referendum. Now, let me just have a look back at the source to make sure I'm happy with how I've done that. The fact that many millions of voters took part, membership of the EU. I think I could actually turn that into a quote as millions of voters take part. Now, I think when you're doing a source question, if you can put quote mark around something to address from the source, it's a really good idea, because it shows that you are using the source in your argument. The source argues that referendums are good for making constitutional decisions as millions of voters take part, in quotes. Expansion from me, the turnout for the Brexit referendum was high, over 70%, and the Scottish referendum turnout was even higher, over 80%. Own knowledge to build it up. This means that referendums can be seen, this means analysis, this means that referendums can be seen to increase political participation and involve more citizens than usual. Dominic Cummings particularly targeted working class voters in the north who don't usually vote in elections and persuaded them to engage in this referendum. I'm satisfied now I've built up this wall. My mission now is I need to smash this wall down. By the time this paragraph ends, I need to have defeated this argument. And some of you guys actually struggle with this. Sometimes I read your essays, and both sides of the argument are there, but you don't necessarily always defeat the wall that you've built up. And I think, to be honest, I've built up quite a good wall here, so I'm going to have to work quite hard to defeat this. So I need to transition now to go to the other side and I need to make sure that I have rubbished this argument by the time I finish. However, this argument is deeply flawed. So I now need to bring in this idea here about lots of people had decisions against their will, and I can also bring in any criticisms of this. So the turnout for the Brexit referendum was high, the Scottish referendum was high. However, we know that actually not all referendums are high, don't we? So let's take that down. However, this argument is deeply flawed. Only certain referendums have high turnout. The AV referendum over the highly important constitutional issue of electoral reform had a turnout of around 40%. Note, I haven't got exactly 42.9%. No, I'm not expecting either me or you to remember exact percentages. As long as you know it's around 40, around 50, around 45%, little words like around are very useful because it means that as long as you are in the right ballpark, the examiner has to kind of say, okay, fine. So the AVU referendum over the highly important constitutional issue of electoral reform had a turnout of around 40%. This means that this shows, so imagine Mrs. McNally saying, so what? This shows that referendums cannot always improve participation and can even lead to, how could I expand this? Because I know what I want to say in a minute about the millions of people with decisions against their will. But maybe I can say lower turnouts than general elections. There you go. So I'm using a bit of I'm showing a bit more knowledge. I can maybe put around 60% there. Remember, I'm knocking down this wall now, so I need to hammer again. So I need to use little phrases on top of this. So I'm using the phrase on top of this to show that I feel like I'm really hammering in this kind of like death peg to this argument. On top of this, even though millions take part, millions can also feel that their views have been ignored. 48% of voters wanted to stay in the EU, and many of them feel now that they have suffered from, let's use a key phrase here, from a tyranny of the majority whereby their views no longer matter. See there, got a nice little key phrase in here. Let's go back to the source, see if there's anything else I want to grab. Oh yeah, younger voters, Scots, Londoners. There's a bit of good evidence. Let's use that as the source states. I'm literally going to copy that out, and I've got this bit here. I might make it a little bit shorter, but I will put quote marks around it. As the source states, younger voters, Scots and Londoners. I'm going to put have you done this in an exam? If you ever want to make a quote shorter, you can put a little ... to show that you've cut that out. So I'm going to go, as the source states, younger voters, the Scots and Londoners were overwhelmed by the national majority. This question is about referendums, yeah? This question is about referendums, and so it's about a form of direct democracy. So I can show my understanding here that this question is actually about direct democracy versus representative democracy. This shows that representative democracy, I need to make this stronger. Remember, I'm building up a wall and knocking it down. I want to use stronger language. This clearly shows that representative democracy is a superior and fairer way of making important constitutional decisions. So now I think I have built up an argument to show that I understand that the source is making that case. And I also think now that I have used language and evidence and emotive language to show why my second half is stronger than my first half, again, using some evidence from the source, some of my own knowledge, some key words. Tell you what, let's just get one more thing in there and I'll edit it in. Let's get you guys in. On top of this, even though millions of voters take part, millions can feel that views have been ignored. 48% of voters want to stay in the EU, and the suffering majority in the views no longer matters. Additionally, citizens under the age of 18 were denied franchise in this referendum and were given no say at all in a decision that may well impact the rest of their lives. There you go. That's very dramatic, isn't it? I can't spell the word franchise. In the maybe I should be more specific. In the EU referendum, and were given no say at all in a decision that may well impact the rest of their lives. And then essentially, I'm just going to do that 3 times. I know it's not necessarily as simple as just, oh, do that 3 times, but I hope you saw how I did that. Paired them up, started with what the source is saying, addressed the source directly as an actor, as a person in the room. The source is saying this. The source is right to say that. I could even go further here. I could say the source is wrong to say that. That would be fine. The source is wrong to say that referendums are good for making constitutional decisions as million voters take part. Whilst, you know, I could do it like that. Look, see, feel how the language changes, how the sentence changes with these few word changes. The source is wrong to say that referendums are good for making constitutional decisions as millions of voters took part. Whilst the turnout for the Brexit referendum was high, over 70%, and the Scottish referendum turnout was even higher, I probably need to put something else in there. Whilst the turnout for referendum was high and the Scottish referendum was even higher. Actually, maybe the word whilst doesn't necessarily work there. If I was going to use the word whilst, which I'm a big fan of in essays, you then have to kind of criticize it straight away. So the source is wrong to say the turnout was this. This means that referendums could possibly, but I'm putting in words to make this seem weaker, could possibly be seen to increase political participation and involve more citizens than usual. Dominic Cummings particularly targeted working voters, and so, however, this argument is deeply flawed. So just those few little phrases there, again, make the wall seem a bit weaker, which then makes my demolition seem a bit stronger. Okay. I'm going to stop the recording here for YouTube, and I'll put this back up, and then you guys can ask me questions and put things in the chat about it. But I hope for any of you that are watching this in the future, whether it's this class or other classes, that this was a useful way of showing how you get from a question to a source to actually starting to write some paragraphs. So I will end the recording